Right, let me start. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Hussein, for organizing this, and thank you, Azim, for the speak just now. And yeah, I think I'll start with a bit of introduction of myself. So, my name is Gaddafi Rusli. Think of me, Gaddafi, or only a design at Settle. Like hopefully what she's said is true. Like if you guys are still at Settle, and try it. To the any for promo code. Give it to you guys. Yeah, right now I'm managing the team here. Settle, a team of around 30 designers right now. Some of them are here as well. All right. Previously I was at Cafe, startups here like Cafe, and most of the time I was the first, the only designers in company when it started. To work on the foundation of the products back in those days. Also a self-team intimator, I guess. Like I spent a lot of time learning code product for fun. You can see here, I put a bunch of screenshots here, but you can figure out where to find it next time, I guess, on the website. Yeah, I mean, the kind of products I built, code I designed and I launched it. Some of them still running, some still making money, some of them are dead. So yeah, just something to do on the side. Right. So yeah, so let's get into the topic I chose today. Fun fact, Jason decided to change this topic to be a nicer sounding topic, but I thought, please no, it this way. But what I'll talk about today is to lead or like get you guys as a designer to help the developers out like process of product development. So, but what I mean by help you, because we are designers, and what can we really help them? There are totally different roles. They are doing different things. Developers doing different things. And why do we even need to help them? Right? Do they even help us in our job? So, what kind of help are there here that we can contribute to the development team, the developers out there to build and launch a good, successful product, right? All right. A little bit of a trouble if I get into the topics. A bit of history of my experience as well. Years of doing this stuff. Like I mentioned just now, like most of the startup joined was the only designer, and I started as a front end developer as well. When I was doing this, I didn't know it was a separate role. I thought it's design and the front end development are all. I teach myself to write JSS, JavaScript, build WordPress and stuff like that. In fact, in my company, we have and all the designers are also front end developers. So I was assuming it was a norm, at least back then. Like, so it was something that we do. We design it. When we're also responsible in making sure that the design looks exactly the same as the design, and also behave like how we behave. Right? And I progressed into my career. I started to work in a company where they had a dedicated developer. Them collaborate with them, explaining about design, explaining about user journey, experience of using the product. And sometimes I have to sit them and try to fix their implementation. It's not how I design, it's how they implement it wrongly. It's time for me to explain them and work with them in a way to reach the final outcome where the user can actually experience what we design in the first place, right? And then over time, I have to juggle working with them one by one. No time to focus on my work. And over time also, like the team get bigger, designers also get bigger, especially after we start working remotely. Less opportunity to sit with the developers, right? So directly the next priority, and we just pass the hand off the design file to them, and hope for the best, right? Hopefully they can understand how to build all those things and can deliver what we want them to create. The history behind this topic, right? So why did I choose this topic and why I want to talk about this? So what is the problem that I'm trying to talk about? I'm trying to surface here. Right? I'm not sure if you guys seen this kind of a meme before. Like, is how the implementation happened. So like you spend a lot of time designing a nice looking interface, super smooth experience or flow for the users, and it turns out to be very different. Right, some we can improve when we work direct or properly with the developer. Whenever there's a need for like a transfer about design detail, experience, and journey, there's always something off lah. Like there's always broken portion here and there. Right? So I got a story about this. When I was working in one of the companies back then, um, I was understand like why the design and the flow the experience properly on the real product, right? So I was questioning the developers. I did the design file. It was Zeppelin back then. But I was using Zeppelin. All the measurement are there, all the flows are there. So I was wondering like why is it different than what the design was? I went to his table. I see him trying to understand what's going on. Like is this like that? And something that he told me is I was like very shocked at first. Like, oh, I thought the design is just a suggestion. So I just look at the visual on the screen, in this, how I should align it or how should I put the sizes and everything, right? So it's like, oh, so that I was shocked at first, like, oh, you thought the suggestion, like, because we as a designer, I think most of you can relate. Like, we spend a lot of time, hours and days in the whole experience. Like what Azim mentioned now in his process, including the research and everything. But towards the end, we spend a lot of time like figuring out the layout, the content, what kind of a copywriting you want to put, the color that works for this problem, and all these hundred tiny decisions that we make along the way to allow the feature to work best for the customer, right? So because even though those minor doesn't mean that the end goal of the product can be met, right? Because when it comes to this stage, like if those tiny decisions that the designers chose when implementing their design, and those tiny decisions doesn't make the point of doing all that, right? So this is okay. It's a bit short, but also give me a bit clarity why this whole thing happened, right? What can we do to improve the process and to make it better for everyone in the process? Familiar with it, especially those who are, I'm sorry for those who are new into the design world, but I mean, from what Chiseng mentioned just now, like about the whole process of design thinking and all. So I guess you guys are familiar with this, the double. There's a lot of process involved in the beginning of this design process. So research, like what Azim was mentioning just now, and what Chiseng was mentioning, like we have a lot of process involved to get there. So try to user interview, stakeholder interview, try to do a business analysis and all that to reach to a point where we can decide on the solution that we want to bring to the user. So there's a lot of conversation and articles of the design process. I'm sure like most of the talks and articles that you guys read about all this process are focusing on this area, which is great. I mean, it's very important for us as a designer to understand all this and to implement this in our daily job. We spend a lot of time on this. We don't want to waste it until the end of the process, where the outcome of this process looks totally different than what we want, right? Yeah. Enough, I think in our process that we have right now, that we didn't do enough that to make sure that the stuff that we have upfront here is properly translated to get to the. In the end, I feel like the effort that we have upfront here is kind of wasted because all the tiny details that we figure out why we should do the things differently here and there turns out translated to the users, right? So this is where the topic that comes, right? So I just want to figure out how can we as a designer, at the end of this double diamond process, we can work with the developer better to make sure that all the findings and all the solutions that we came up with reach the user in a way that we want it to be like, right? Because when it comes to this kind of a problem, like I don't want to focus on the user interface alone. The problem statement is not focusing on the UI issues only. Right? because there's a lot of different factors that are gonna influence all these different problems that we are facing, right? So, for example, when you talk about the UI, the spacings or layout, font size, wrong font size, for example, can impact how the hierarchy of the page is laid out. Wrong layout, for example, can make the IA of the page weak, which can impact of how user understand the information on this kind of tiny decision being lost, like it is implemented. Micro interactions, like when we come up with the animation for the things, we want to make sure that things also exist in the final product, so then user can experience it as well, right? Like when we talk about application, like familiar and native interaction, like changing between pages, gesture, haptic feedback, have to be used correctly because they are familiar with this. And we don't want to confuse them with a different way of using it. Flow engineering, of course, like if we miss a certain flow or do it incorrectly, we might, error your conversion metrics because user couldn't figure out how to complete the job properly. And lastly, the state, if you just focus on the ideal scenario and the developer didn't implement those additional states like loading state, what happened? There's an error. What happened? There's no data. What is showing on the screen? So those things will give more burden to the user if they figure out happening on the screen. They cannot figure out, and at the end of the day, they can their job done properly. All right. Okay, so what's the goal here? Like, what's the goal of this topic, and what we're trying to think that we wanna solve? Right? There are a few audience, I guess, for this topics. Like the users, we want to make sure that our solution that we figure out at the beginning of the double diving process reaches the user as how we intended it to be, right? Because if those are not, if we spend a lot of time there and we didn't the end of implementation, those things are wasted, I would say, because we cannot see the output when user using it later on. For the developer, why you want to do, make sure that to have a smooth development process when they are implementing our design solution, because there's a miscommunication and broken communication between designers and developers that can contribute to this kind of issues. So how can we as a designer work with them better in order to achieve this? And I guess for us, the designers, to sleep better at night, I guess my personal experience with this, like I'll be sitting on my bed, looking at the app that we work on, try to go through the stuff and then screenshot stuff instead of sleep, because there are tiny little things that we miss in the implementation progress. Yeah. So ideally, we want to achieve all these kind of goals to make sure that we satisfy all these needs for all of the different audience in our. Okay. Right. So how do we do it? Right? So what can we do? Because how to fix those issues in order to achieve those goals? Because what kind of process we can introduce to help our developers to deliver a better output when it comes to implementing the design. I'm going to structure this as challenges and tips, because what kind of challenges you might be facing in your current process. And I'll share some tips, I guess, like based on what I've experienced in my current work and also in my previous experience as well, and how we can do to ease those challenges in order to achieve what we want. The first one, I think quite a simple, quite some basic stuff. I guess like the challenges that we have right now is, I guess for those teams that hasn't been implementing it right now, like the handoff file that the developers are unable to understand the user journey from the beginning to end, and we also very fond of using a clickable prototype, and actually it's very hard for those engineers and navigate through the whole prototype without missing certain scenarios, right? So the tips that I can give is to provide a visual user journey diagram instead of a screen, just a bunch of screens or a bunch of text, right? I mean, some of you might say, yeah, I mean, this is quite basic. using this. Recently, Zeppelin launched. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Zeppelin. It was a OG handoff tool back in the days. Recently, they launched this additional new feature. It's talking about flow. I really enjoy the way they what their feature here with this video. I guess you guys can go to this website and watch the whole video, but I clipped some part of the videos here to show that the developers are struggling to understand the Figma file, because this designer just put that and then the developer to know which one to work on and which flow it would lead to when user click, right? So this seems to be like a pretty common problems, I guess, in a team, either with an engineer or with designer, right? So this is very close to what I'm trying to highlight here. So when developer look for the files, right, when they want to develop, or the things that I would assume that they will need, I guess, to make sure that they understand the whole thing. So they need a single view of the whole journey instead of like a bunch of screens next to each other, all the possible states. For example, we don't want scenario only, like all the good stuff, and then we didn't care about the empty states or the error states or the fail state. Edge cases, especially for those things that rarely happen, we might miss it. So how do we handle it? We're definitely going to make work with the engineer directly, and only want to show the relevant screens in the handoff file. Because for them, when they want to, before the developers start working on the project, they would usually try to estimate the stuff that they need to work on. And having all this is something that we can do to help them to estimate better, I guess, in order to develop this kind of feature. Yeah, so instead of placing the screens next to each other and expect the developer to know how each screen are connected to each other, I think a better solution is, of course, to move it into a visual diagram. So it's not really like a text box connecting to the next text box, but it's a real screen. When you click on this button of the screen, it goes to this screen, and what scenario, in what scenario will this happen, and how do I go back? And all those things will contribute to how the understanding for the developer in order to plan their work better. Yeah. By doing this, they won't miss any important any flow logs. We cut down the revision time as well for them to redo the wrong thing. In Subtle, for example, we are using this application called Overflow. We're using it for quite some time, beta days, but they have evolved so much that it has been a very critical tool in our flow. This example of a user diagram that we create using this diagram, this tool. So we have a bunch of different sections that show the screens that's connected based on what scenarios as well. Yeah. As a bonus, I just want to highlight that this tool has been very critical in a way that it works. It is being used for all the areas of the company to share with the designers to get feedback. Of course, we share this to the developer for them to understand the whole flow. We share the project managers to share them our progress. We also work with the copywriter for them to comment on the screen on session, and we use it also for big stakeholder presentation, even up to the Petronas level. This is a very important tool that can highlight the whole journey better for them to understand it. Right. On to the second one here. The second one is this. I guess this is something.
Once again, thanks Gaddafi for the awesome talk. I hope right now, especially for those who is transitioning as well, you kind of get to know what it's like. Our day-to-day job as well. It's not only about pixel pushing. There's a lot of technical stuff as well.
Yeah.
There's quite some question for Q&A. We have time as well. All right, let's jump into the first question by Azim Jamil, who is our first speaker tonight as well. So Azim asked that, working in a small company as a sole designer plus a few developers, how do you know when is the time to invest in growing a proper design system?
I think I wouldn't recommend creating immediately, because starting in a new company, new product, you don't know what you don't know how the product's gonna evolve. So waste a lot of time trying to perfect those components, but you might have to retake it once the product, might change, like pivot, right? So I think it's a good start if you have a smaller library, just to, once you notice a lot of inconsistency across the design, across the implementation, then only you start bringing this into a library for developer to component stuff. Yeah, once expanding that library, once you notice all these different components that, I might use this in different screens, maybe we should turn it into a component. I mean, I would advise against creating the whole system from the beginning if you are not firm on the products or the direction of the company. Yeah.
All right, got it. I hope that answered your question, Azim. So let me take a look. Another one. All right. Let's see. Right. So another one from Melissa is learning to build via CMS a good place to start understand front end? So this is more like learning to be much more like a unicorn. And then Melissa's question is like, is learning to build via CMS a good place to start understand front end? If yes, is there a mobile app equivalent? Also, what would you say is the most efficient way to understand systems other than just reading?
Okay, first question. Working on front end side of things, like it can be the CSS, HTML. Of course, when you work on CMS like WordPress, there's additional language. So I think it's still a good opportunity to learn all those things like CSS, HTML, even though you are focusing. I think I would say it's a good start as well. I started with WordPress development back then. But in expand yourself, I think there's a lot of different CMS, different that you can create teams and create website, create landing page, and learn all this CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. Yeah. Second question, system design without reading. I think you just have to start doing it. I think Fima have a very good comes to designing system. I think you should try to create a library. How do you use it? How do you expand the to multiple variants? And how do you create one component that can be some different kind of feature without having to tweak the component again? When it comes to system design, you have to limit. You shouldn't limit your into one set of feature only. You should be able to use it across different feature within the same product, of course. As you'll be able to balance out in being flexible and being very yeah.
All right, got it. Now another one from Azim as well. It's this question is actually goes back to more on the designing for edge cases for developers. So Azim was asking, how much should you design for edge cases for your developers? Because currently his pain point is that he can't move forward with design as his CTO is finding edge cases, which he thinks is a great case, but slows down the development.
I think you need to understand that designing the edge cases is not for your developer, it's your user. You don't want your user to stumble into an edge cases where suddenly the screen become blank or crash the app, right? So you have to make sure that all these are handled. Otherwise, user will be facing all this threat like that. So I think it's very important to make sure we take care of all the edge cases that we can think of. I mean, of course, there are certain edge cases that nobody might even know until it happens. So I think that is, of course, we enhance over time. But as long as we know that thing might happen, we should figure out a way to handle it in a way. We can find one pattern that works across all different edge cases. As long as this set of edge cases happen, user will see this message or go into this flow down the screen that need to customizing it for different edge cases. But yeah, I mean, to answer the question, it's not for your developer, like, for your user and for your product as well.
All right, got it. Another one from Melissa as well. This is about reusing design patterns. She's asking, what's your take on using wireframe kits since you mentioned reusing design patterns?
I think as a start, if you need, before let's say you need to launch quickly, you don't have a capacity to design from scratch, I think it's still okay to start with a kit, as long as the components in that kit is sufficient to satisfy the need of your product. But over time, you'll find yourself customizing all this because every product might be a bit unique, right? So you might need to tweak it a bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't see any problem of starting with a design kit as long as it satisfies the need of your product. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Now this one is I think this one is particularly interesting by Sofia Azizan. So in a startup environment, what is the best ways to solve a design problem when the proposed design is not accepted by internal stakeholders like CEOs and developers, and they suggested a design instead which somehow contradicts the initial user testing?
Wow. I think this is a bit of our topic, but yeah, I mean, confident with the output, the findings from your user research or usability testing. We should figure out a way to convince them that that is the better approach, lah. But if they are against go, like take whatever they suggest and do user testing like that. So then we can bring up the report to them again. See, I tried with your suggestion. These are the outcome. If it's better, then of course you accept your defeat. But if it's not, and you have to present it honestly to them. Yeah, I mean, if you go ahead with this, you guys should expect any. You guys should expect any some issues from the users. To be transparent, be upfront about it and show the outcome from the research, justify their decision.
Yep. So I think Sophia, so the answer would be test the one that that they think is good, then see the final result.
Some people who are also on the same page as you and try to figure out a way to convince the team. It might be hard to do it alone. If you have some people to back you up, it might be helpful.
Yep. All right. There are a few more. I think maybe I'll take this one. So this is a question from Rick Lee. So he is asking, would you be able to clarify product manager's role in the process that you mentioned? Like because to Rick, he always thought that PM is the bridge between designers and developers.
Oh, okay. I guess different companies might have it structured differently. But for us, product, I mean, in the team that we have right now, product manager, designer, and developers, they kind of work together in the same team. But it doesn't mean that you cannot talk to the developer directly, right? So because most of the time, actually a bridge between you and the stakeholders. Like what are the stuff that we want to build next? What are the things that we need to explore? So that one we get from the product manager, we learn it from the stakeholders. But when it comes to the design implement, we should be able to work with you directly as well. Of course, they have some sprint planning, all this with the manager, but it doesn't mean that they should only talk to each other. I guess it depends on how you structure it in your company. But so far from what my companies before is also that it should be to work with the engineers directly.
Yep, got it. So we're not sure what your PM role is, Rick, but it really depends on the organization as well.
Yeah.
But I think regardless of organization and the size or even the product, designers as always or developers should always be communicating constantly.
Yeah.
I think final question from Melissa as well. I'll break it down to two because the question is a little bit long. Right. The first one is, how long does it take to create your design specs for a single ticket? Is there like a vetting process for all these specs before the handoff?
For vetting. when we first started doing it in a team, it was a smaller team, so I was the one who reviewing the document to make sure that, because when we first started, I actually don't have any idea of how the structure should be, so I'm trying to learn from writing it as well. Okay, this one maybe not, let's see, kind of is not necessary. Once we figure out the structure around it, I actually pass it the process to the design system owners, that what I was talking about, who are managing the design system, because we want to make sure that the design spec highlight the right component, the right patterns for that product. So that is the vetting and review process. So I mentioned about having a Slack channel for every design system. So all the designers who create a design system, design spec, will share their spec in that channel and get people who are owning the system to review it, comment, or give any feedback on the document. And other good, just links to the document are shared to the developer in the ticket. How long it takes actually depends on the feature itself. There are times when it was just like few days, just few hours. Depends on the feature. Like it might take longer. A big feature. Some designers in my team also break the documents into multiple different documents because it's a big feature. So they break it down into multiple different documents to make it easier for the developer to read.
Now this brings me to the second question from this one, is that she's curious whether it's important to sit with the engineers to run through the specs review in real time as well.
I don't think it's necessary because that defeats the purpose of having a spec. I think it's okay to just share them the link and get them to go through it, and can have a session if they have any questions later on. But so far from what I understand from we don't really have that session. We walk through the user journey diagram, the flow, highlighting the cases and all that, and then the document we just pass it to them during the development.
All right.
But
so that
if you are sorry,
yeah,
I mean, just
go
want to
ahead.
add, of course, if you're a smaller team, let's say you have like 1 or 2 designers with 1 or 2 engineers, I think it's okay to, especially when you first start doing this kind of sit with them, trying to explain to them what's the purpose of this thing and get them to buy in on this thing. Otherwise, they'll just like, oh, why I want to read all this? But get their buy-in, get them involved in the process.
All right, cool. So hope that answers your question, Melissa. And I think that's all the question for this particular session tonight. And that said, that's actually the end of this meetup.